to start out.
You are old, Mark.
If I could walk up to the front of the room here, I don't have enough energy. Madam Toastmaster and fellow Toastmasters, you might think, what a peculiar subject, my favorite founding father. No, I did not know any of them. When I was in college, I was a history major. My majors were American history and Far Eastern studies. About 3.5 years ago, I don't know if anybody saw this HBO miniseries on John Adams. Terrific, really terrific. It piqued my interest to go back and start looking at the Founding Fathers again, and I started reading books on various Founding Fathers to reacquaint myself with that period of our history. So I'm going to role play a little bit, and anybody but Lynn already told me who I was going to talk about. If you know who I'm talking about, just shout it out. And as soon as you identify him, I'm going to continue with my speech. It has to be a him because unfortunately they were Founding Fathers. I was 11 years old when my father died. As a young boy, my family told me that I was going to go to England to get my formal education, which was only right because my two older brothers went to England where they were educated. But when I was 11 years old, my father passed away, and my family couldn't afford to lose me as a worker, and so I had to stay at home. Now, I was a hard worker, always industrious. When I was 15 years old, I apprenticed myself out to a surveyor and learned the skill of surveying. I was so good at it that at age 17, I had my own surveying firm.
George Washington?
Yes. George Washington. I had my own surveying firm. I later went into the English Army, British Army, where I was an officer, and I fought in the French and Indian War that began in 1755. Actually, I was the most commanding American officer in the English Army at the time. When the American patriots decided to seek redress against the British, there was a constitutional, not a constitutional convention, but a convention called in Philadelphia, and I was a delegate to that convention. And I wore my uniform. Now, there's a historian who says the reason that George Washington wore his uniform to the Constitutional Convention was he wanted everybody to not forget, I'm a soldier. You need a soldier, you need a commander-in-chief, I'm your guy. I'm not so sure that's true, knowing Washington and having read a couple of biographies about him. He was a very self-confident individual, but he also had a lot of doubts about not only going to war with Great Britain, because he was an Anglophile. He really believed in Great Britain, was a loyal citizen to the crown until his compatriots decided that the best thing to do was to seek redress by declaring independence. When everybody decided that, then George was on board, but he certainly wasn't one of the leaders in breaking away from Great Britain. He was, in fact, appointed the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, which was sort of a mixed blessing. You know, he gets the title, but there's no army. He gets the title, but there's no navy. All he had was a ragtag group of farmers who volunteered to become part of the army. Now, he wrote in his diaries that he was very depressed about going to war with England because he felt that they really didn't have much of a chance. This is the greatest military power in the history of this particular time. They had the largest navy, they had the largest army, and they had battle-hardened soldiers who had fought in Europe for years. These were the best of the best. And he knew that he could not win a heads-up battle with the British. There was no way. had very few of those. And what he did is he fought the first guerrilla war against the British. He would attack the British when he thought he could get away with it. We all know this famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. He wasn't really standing up in the boat because the water was quite choppy, but it makes a romantic painting. He did that because he was going across the river and knew that the British wouldn't expect him to do that when he attacked the Hessians, who were mercenaries fighting for the British, and had a resounding victory at the Battle of Trenton. He finished out the war, and when he finished out the war, George III, who was the King of England, called him the greatest man on earth. Not because he admired him, because he defeated the British Empire. Washington could have done anything at that moment in time. He could have been the king of America. He could have been a dictator. He could have done anything. He had the entire army who loved him, behind him. What did he do? He resigned his commission and he went home to Mount Vernon to be a farmer. The Europeans had no idea what this was all about. They said, he's crazy. This is the most important person in this country, and he's giving up the power. That was unheard of. He went back to be a gentleman farmer. And then shortly after that period of time when the war was over, he was asked to represent Virginia in the Continental Congress that was designed to write the Constitution of the United States. When he arrived in Philadelphia for that task, he was elected the chairman of the meeting and supervised the writing of the Constitution. He really didn't write any part of the Constitution, but he was in charge of the meeting. When the Constitution was drafted, of course, we all know the story that without the Bill of Rights, we wouldn't have passed the Constitution. And James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights. But it had to be circulated to all the states to get buy-in from all the states so that we could have that Constitution ratified. As part of that ratification of the Constitution, there were elections for president. He announced at the Constitutional Convention, I don't want to be president. I donated 8 years of my life to the war. I've done enough for my country. I want to be home. And they said, okay. So they all went back to their respective colonies and they took a vote and they voted for him for president. And he said to Thomas Jefferson, hey, you guys, I did not want to be president. He said, I said I was not going to run for president. And Jefferson said, you didn't run for president. You were elected independent of your own wishes. And we think you're the best man for the job. He said, okay, I'll do it. 4 years as president. I know I'm going to run over time here because I'm probably going to cover 10% of my speech, which is my problem. But at the time, at the end of his 4 years, he wanted to go home again. John Adams, and Jefferson said, you're not going anywhere. This country is too weak and too shaky at this point. We need you to do another 4 years. You're the only guy that everybody trusts. You're the only guy that everybody will follow. And Washington reluctantly said, okay. So now we have him at 8 and 4 and 4 dedicated to his country, and all he really ever wanted to do was be a farmer. He always gave up power. He never sought self-aggrandizement. He never sought monetary gain for himself. He never sought to be in the limelight. He did what he did in the service of his country. Juxtapose that to today's politician. I don't care what party you belong to, but it's a far cry from people who can't wait to get their face in front of a camera, who fight desperately not to be discharged from service of their country, whether it be as a senator, congressman, or president. We need more George Washingtons, and that's why he's my favorite president and favorite founding father, because he did it